on Sundays.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that makes sense.
hello, welcome to this very special episode of Discussion with an Expert. Today's expert will introduce himself very shortly, but he wrote an amazing paper that I've talked about before on this channel. It's about market systems development and especially market system development in rural employment. He educated us on the approach and how we can apply the approach to rural employment. So this is what we're going to discuss, and I'll let him introduce himself shortly. Hello, welcome to today's special episode. As I mentioned earlier, we're discussing with an expert in market system development, with particular interest in market system development for employment. I'll let him introduce himself to you. Hello, Ashley.
Hi everyone. Yeah, I was saying it's a great honor to be here. I watched a lot of these videos, so it's nice. It's slightly odd to be on the other side, but it's a real pleasure.
You're very kind. You're very kind.
And
So
I've known
actually,
you. Yeah,
I suppose the best place to start is really to introduce yourself to our audience and tell them what you are and how you got into MSD and what has happened with this zeroing of your interest into MSD for employment.
sure. Really happy to. So I've worked in MSD for a good number of years, and a lot of that was in agriculture. And I think that's how I think we met. But I was at an event. Maybe it was in Nigeria, and you were
Yes.
working in some of the GEMS programs, and I was like, wow,
Yes.
you were presenting. I was like, wow, this guy is you knew so much. I thought I need to bring him into other projects somehow. Um, that was my takeaway from that event. But I worked a number of years in MSD programs, and then I joined at one point. I joined Mercy Corps, where they would do a lot of MSD work in agriculture, but I was brought in to bring MSD into the employment side. And I think then, it was quite common to see these large USAID programs that would be like rural jobs. We have all this kind of MSD stuff in agriculture, but as soon as it came to employment, it was just direct. It was just, paying for training, giving out micro grants. So I was brought in around that. I worked for a while there, and this paper came from that. I then managed more recently like an MSD program in Southeast Asia, and now my job's shifted a bit. I'm now working more around working with some of the large US retailers. I work at Oxfam now. Some of the large US retailers about trying to improve their supply chains
Nice.
to lower income countries. But yeah, that's the flow.
Now, so there's are you applying MSD to the supply chain to this large supply chains, or is it just purely commercial now?
It's interesting. I think a lot of the tactics are there in terms of understanding like things around will, skill, understanding ways to navigate them. So a lot of that learning has come in from the MSD side. Um, but yeah, but as well we have kind of these clear. I guess some of these supermarkets are just so big that if you can change them, you already have this really big scale. they're buying from all around the world. So I guess it's not called MSD, but
Right.
definitely a lot of the same tactics are there.
Nice. Now, okay, so now MSD for employment. You wrote this fantastic paper. As I said earlier, I've spoken about this on this channel, and quite a lot of people talking about it on LinkedIn because it just explains very clearly what the difference is between direct delivery and potential progression to real pure MSD programming. I just wonder if you can just walk us through that. First of all, how did that paper come about? I know you said this was in Mexico, and why you felt it was important to really break it down, and then maybe walk us through the approach itself.
I think there was a funder, I don't remember exactly, but a funder asking us to write something on MSD for jobs. And someone had drafted it first. And their definition of MSD was just very loose. It was like, you need to be adaptive, you need to do market assessment. And you do, of course you do, and probably more than other contexts, but all programs need to do that.
Yes.
And I really felt they were missing the exact thing that made it different. And I guess that was my broader concern, that there's a lot of people saying this is MSD, that's MSD, and they're not necessarily wrong, but it's just they're not very clear. And so I wanted to do, if I look at the framework, it's not perfect. It's definitely, it's definitely gaps in it. But I just thought, let's try to write something that's quite simple. Maybe for someone who's maybe newer to MSD, who hasn't spent 20 years working on it, but something that is maybe 80% right, but it's just quite simple. So that was the idea behind it.
Fantastic idea. It's not just the new entrants, actually. I learned, and I've been in MSD for a bit. I learned quite a bit from that paper. What I especially like is the fact that you can look at each of the different approaches as independent, and you can see them as continuum. As a matter of fact, you can you can. I have applied it in my in one of the last job that I did, and I literally just bolted on the difference between one approach to the next to just show the team that we're now moving towards MSD, that we're not purely MSD, but we're moving towards MSD. This was in Humanitarian Development Nexus program that I worked on. But yeah, so perhaps you can help us through the approach itself.
Well, that's really great to hear that. I mean, that was really the idea. It's just a tool to help people. It's not perfect, but just to help people. So it tries to say there's 4 different approaches, and maybe the names aren't right. I think the names of people say, like, where did this come from? I try to reference the ideas, but a lot of I come on made up names. So a lot of it, I think they're all known things, but a bit of it is from my own head as well. But the first one is direct approach. Our charity, where we are paying people to do things. So we're paying, we're giving money to people, we're training people ourselves. So it's us as the NGO doing something. And then the second one, I think at one point I called it improved direct delivery, but then it changed to transactional, is where we are essentially paying someone else to do something. So maybe in employment, we're paying a training center, TVET center, to train people. We are paying a business maybe to do something. And a lot of people, I think, thought that was MSD, because we're not doing it. But it's not MSD, because there's no sustainability. It's just you are paying someone to do something, and
So
they
it's
will
like
stop
service
as soon as
delivery.
you go. It is exactly service delivery, and if it was you're paying them so they're inspired and they keep on doing something, well, that's fine, and then it's a later category. But the idea is just if you're paying someone to do something just for the money. Then the third one, I think we called inclusive market actors. Inclusive business was a term used quite a lot, so we thought about that, or MSD Light. the pros and cons to different names.
Yes.
But that's really when you're getting a marketer, you're influencing a market actor to do something that they will keep on doing when your support ends. You're whether or not you're building their capacity, you're making the case to them, but it's really about the sustainability. And I think, as long as for a lot of my programs I've worked on, if I can get to that column, I'm really happy.
Yes.
That's a good place to be. It's
Yes.
not easy.
Yes.
Uh, and then the fourth one is really about the big change. It's when you're taking like a function that's like maybe it's training or finance, and you're talking about really large scale change there with a large number of actors changing or large actors changing, and that it works in a continuum because not always, but often it's that one in column 3 might be how you get to 4. You
Yes.
can actually change as a way to influence others. But that's maybe where it breaks down a bit. Maybe there's other ways you can get to 4. But anyway, yeah, that's the kind of summary of the framework.
No, thanks very much for that. So, my experience has been that most MSD programs that I've seen are between the pay for service, the column 2 and the column 3, and where they're playing with partners and essentially either paying the partner to deliver a service or finding a way to get the partner to own the change within the partner's business. So I just wondered if we can spend a bit more time on that, especially the pay for service one, because a lot of MSD programs think that's MSD because the program staff are not doing the delivery, they're not doing the service. They feel that that's MSD. But if you're paying for the service, you might as well be doing the work. I mean, it sounds like you're doing the work. So is there a real difference between direct delivery and paying for service to be delivered, apart from the people that actually perform the task itself?
So you mean between columns 1 and columns 2, or between 2 and 3?
2 and 3.
Yeah, no, what's interesting is that between each of the columns, it seems quite simple to move, but actually it's a really big difference. And you might find, the interventions you wanted to do for column 1, you can't do for 2, or you can't do for 3, and you need to drop them. I'll answer your question. I would say the way I've worked through this framework is really, just trying to move people along, and maybe having a review of the program, try to not have any in column 1. Column 2 is better than column 1. Ideally, the way, you'd have a lot in column 3, maybe you have a couple in column 4. But anyway, it's like you're saying we're trying to move over, knowing that it's difficult depending on the situation or the context. Between 2 and 3, yeah, like you said, that's a really important difference, because that's really about the sustainability.
Yes.
And I think, for the employment programs I've worked on, if they have several in 3, that's great for them. But yeah, column 3 is really about the sustainability, about ensuring that any market actor will keep on doing something when the program ends. And so, I don't know if this is a good example, but I had quite a formative experience in Tanzania, where I was working on there's a kind of a TVET program. I was evaluating them. And they were supporting some public TVET centers to bring in, I think, job skills and job matching, really valuable things. But they were paying 100% of the wages of these staff, 100%. And they were saying, no, this is sustainable, And I said, well, why is it sustainable? Because the TVET centers have told us. They've told us, if you pay us 100% of the wages for 5 years, when you go, we'll keep on doing it. Like, we've got a paper. And that was it. And it could be, right? It could be sustainable. It could be you're making a case, but you're not doing yourselves any favors. Mm-hmm. If you were doing some kind of cost sharing, but you were at least testing out their interest, you're making them put something, or if you just need to be, so free is sustainable, but you want to be using the MSD tactics to make sure it's likely to be sustainable. And what actually happened in this case was like after I did evaluations that like it highlighted the issues. I think 6 months later, the Tibets came to them and asked for more money. For so I mean, what did they say? They said, "Well, we have a contract. If they break the contract, it'll be illegal. You're going to sue them? You're not going to sue them. Why would you do that?" So yeah, I don't know. That's a good example. But free is really about the sustainability.
And so this is some of the discussions I've had about what actually makes an MSD program or what makes an MSD intervention. And some of the things I've always said is that, look, for the idea is not for development programs and professionals to go out there and say, oh, look, I have this bunch of money and this is how we want you to behave. So therefore, we'll give you this money if you behave in that way. And I've always said that the way we need to approach this is to present an investment opportunity for whichever partner to say, look, if you do this and you behave in this way, right, this is the rewards that you will get in terms of increase in market size, in terms of increase in revenue or whatever. And if the partner sees the commercial viability and potential gains from it, then the partner may begin to spend resources, human or funds, into it. And if there's a struggle, if either they haven't budgeted for the period, or it's just not in their plans, then we can then begin to think in terms of co-creating and how we can join them in actually making this happen at the time that we're there as a program. But there appears to be organizations that have a very clear definition of what MSD is. And as far as they're concerned, it's about risk management. So they can't enter into a partnership without having a formal contract, right? And the contract will stipulate that the partners are given money and the partner act in certain way. So to me, that's simple service delivery, and that is definitely not column 3. That's more column 1 and column 2. What's been your experience when you speak to all of these programs, and the organization that's implementing the program itself have a sort of like a control issue around contracts?
All those difficult questions. I think the starting point is exactly what you say, that there needs to be the incentive. So I really like the way that you put that, whether or not it's financial, or if you're working with a TVET, if you're working with a public official, it could be another type of incentive. It's the quality of their services, or maybe it's their reputation, or like if there's a league table. So there's different types of incentives, but that needs to drive what you're doing. Maybe you start off, when I'm brainstorming with teams in the past, like we're already thinking, what's the likely incentive here? And then maybe you need to flesh it out a bit more. I mean, that's kind of the art of the job. But I think that comes first. So I'd agree with that point. And, but then I guess at some point it gets into the nature of organizations. And for some implementing organizations, they have very difficult structures. So, I mean, what a contract there is very explicitly saying, do this and do that. Yeah, that's going to be a challenge. I've seen, I think on the Beam exchange, there's some examples of things that are in the middle, which is contracts around with clear kind of outputs or sorry, outcomes in them. I guess that I'm not sure I can add them. Really, like a lot of organizations have significant challenges working in MSD. I don't know if this is going into other areas, but some, I don't know, think they can do all kinds of things in MSD, but they lack complete flexibility. So, this is a different point, but I've worked in places where all they can do is do training. And it's like that's the only tool you have. You need to be able to try out different tools. You need to. I mean, there's all kinds of things can hold you back from good MSD.
Yeah, it's a problem. But I think for the audience, I think what's probably uh, more important is for them to really be clear what MSD is and how we move from direct delivery to MSD. The third column, actually, I want to talk about the second column, which is more transactional. Do you think there is an element of demonstration effect in that second column? So a program is paying for a service, and the idea around that is to say that they pay through the beneficiaries or through participants or whomever it is that they've decided to pay through. And the idea is to demonstrate to the service provider or the private sector actor that's doing the function to say that, look, there's a market here. Yes, we're paying the money, right, for these people. But if you can show that the service is beneficial to the beneficiaries, then you have a market. I'm not sure I've explained that properly, but what I mean
Yeah,
is, if I'm not if I have a private sector actor and I have beneficiaries, I'm not paying as a program. I'm not paying the private sector actor directly, but I'm paying through the beneficiary. So I give the beneficiary money, and the beneficiary then go and pay the private sector actor. Would you think that's a good movement towards demonstrating the viability of this of the function, and potentially move gradually to where the actor will now begin to uh, actively market the function in the location?
yeah. I think that's a really good question and really gets to that the column two, three difference. Um, the demonstration effect can be very powerful. I guess if I had someone coming to me with that, I would I would talk to them a bit about their confidence that the demonstration is needed, because I think sometimes it's easy to assume it's needed, but it might not be. So can I give an example? Maybe if I was to kind of give an example, talking about employment, maybe trying to make the case to, I guess this could be a private TVET center, that if they do a course in a new material in a new area, there's going to be a lot of market demand for it. So maybe this idea is that you will your um, well, I'm not sure if this example works. I guess I would say the demonstration effect, you would need some kind of confidence that it would lead to the impact you want, that there is a market. So rather than just hoping I will show something, you want to maybe speak to the market acts to see what is holding you back. Are
Mm,
you just not aware that there is this market? And so therefore, if I showed you there's the market, would it change what you're doing? And actually, is there a market? So you need to have your market assessment, and you need to understand what's holding back the private sector. So I
mm,
guess it can be a helpful tool, but you shouldn't assume it is. Yeah, I guess if I was a manager talking to my intervention manager, I would say, what is your confidence that this is the right tool here, and it may be the right one. I mean, in terms of how to do it, then you get into, I guess, the tactics, which it's the situation. I think would guide you on the best tactic. But if you're saying, could you either give the funds via the beneficiary, you give them some funds to make their decision, or maybe you work via the market actor to subsidize a certain action. Um, I think I would, in my experience, I'd be leaning towards the latter, kind of working through the market actor. So essentially subsidizing them to do something, so they see the value and they keep on doing it in the future. The two might seem similar,
mm,
but going through the market actor means the market actor is already changing what they're doing. You're building up relations with them. They're seeing firsthand a bit more the thing you want them to see. So I guess I would normally be trying to do that via the market actor, but I do appreciate sometimes that might not be possible. Um, so you'd have to see based on the context.
Thanks so much. In the last few minutes, I was just wondering, is there, of the four columns or the four different approaches, employment in rural areas or rural employment and urban employment, is there a significant difference in the way MSD is applied to those contexts in the rural or urban employment?
Yeah, so I should probably say that the framework came out from, if you, I still think if you've been working many years, it's quite a simple framework, but it just, in employment, the work was so direct in many cases. And like I said, you have these large USAID programs that were really clever MSD programs with smallholder farmers. But as soon as it got to this little bit of off or non-farm, it was just paying, and it was so direct. So that was where it came from, that even the same people were just bringing MSD and ag, non-MSD.
Mm,
So I guess before jumping onto the rural bit, what the report you mentioned, it talks about the framework, but also it just talks about employment more generally
mm,
and about how we need to reconceptualize it.
yeah.
I mean, probably the most obvious point is that so much funding goes into training. And
Yeah.
I think it kind of says we need to look much more at labor demand, at kind of job building. And particularly, I think in rural areas, like a lot of money goes into training for jobs that often don't exist. And so it doesn't say stop the training, but just rebalance it, make it a smaller part of your work. And I was influenced quite a lot. There was like Louis Fox at USAID who did a great report on in jobs in sub-Saharan Africa, like reviewing programs, and said that some of the training programs, they look good, but a lot of that is because they've helped people get into jobs, but they've actually pushed people out of jobs. The people that people would have taken on those jobs, but because you've trained these people, other people haven't got their jobs. So
Mm,
it's actually, if you work out the total employment is actually a lot smaller because your work is, because in a context where there's a lot of people looking for jobs, if you train more people to get jobs, you're pushing out other people. Um, but generally, it also, I was quite influenced by the Leeway program in Addis Ababa, that they had a beautiful way of looking at how different sectors worked. And so I think there's a lot of similar, if you're in a context where there's maybe not one sector that has a big job potential, but a lot of sectors are quite small potential, but quite similar. Maybe lots of different types of micro enterprises are struggling to access finance or places to work, or childcare issues. Then they can say, well, actually, you can take micro enterprises as a sector,
mm,
or even kind of factory work as a sector, and that really inspired me quite a lot. And so the report talks a bit about that. And I guess to bring it to the rural areas, it's interesting. What kind of I mean, there was just, when I wrote that, there was very few programs taking an MSD approach to rural jobs, potentially none. We worked on one rallies at Mercy Corps, but I think that closed down. The person leading that was Susan Mayner. I know Ben Taylor was supporting it, but they could be good people to talk about here. Um, they had a couple of intervention ideas, but I think they didn't get really funding to go much further. But I guess what I'd say for rural areas is a couple of things. One, I mean, I don't know, it depends on the context, but most opportunities are still going to be in smallholder farming. So any approach needs to look across different contexts, and also maybe be less ambitious. It's harder to create jobs in rural areas. That's why people are leaving rural areas. So it's still very important, very important. Just be a bit more realistic, and probably a stronger program would be one that isn't just, it's a combination of smallholder farming plus some off-farm, non-farm, and just knowing your numbers will probably come from the smallholder farming side. um, so I think, understanding that. Then a couple of rallies had a couple of nice intervention ideas. One was, I mean, it looked at kind of micro enterprises in rural areas. So I think tried working with manufacturers, distributors in urban areas to set up essentially supply chains into rural areas. I think they're looking a little bit at solar energy, so working with some solar companies to develop rural distribution. Maybe not massive numbers, but this kind of positive environmental impact. They were doing quite interesting work looking at, in Addis Ababa, Leeway, a third of the program was around skills development and job matching, which seems to me about right. Most programs it's nearly all the program, but I think a third, with the rest more on the jobs creation side.
Mm.
I think in the rural areas they didn't look at this. There was no part of the program looking at the skills development, or very little, because it didn't quite make sense in that context to train
Yes.
people for jobs that didn't exist. But they looked at migration. So I think they were looking at people migrating. It was northern Kenya to Nairobi or other places. And so they started working with some, I think, job placement companies in urban areas who were looking for people for rural areas, and tried to improve their services. So they looked at migration as I don't know what you call that, a sector, but as an
Mm.
area of interest.
I mean, that's really interesting. So I mean, unfortunately, we're running low on time. As a matter of fact, we're way beyond the 30 minutes that I was hoping we'd do this for. And so there's a couple of real serious issues that I would like to discuss in what you've just said. One is the on-farm and off-farm, the implication for the way we approach MSD. Second is the zooming out of the context. By that I mean zooming out to see what the interplays are between different sectors and how those sectors can potentially become instruments or tools or channels in which you can apply MSD and hopefully get the impact that you're looking for. And the other thing that you mentioned there is around scale. So you refer to numbers might come from the smallholders, or numbers might come from off-farm employment. People struggle with that, and my own inclination is to say programs are supposed to be pilots. Programs are supposed to test hypotheses, and a follow-on program, or perhaps something else, can be funded that would take this hypothesis that has been proven and has been tweaked in a pilot program and to scale. What's your view on that? I'll just make this the last question so we don't go on too long.
Okay, yeah. Several, and I think I'm gonna put a few things into it. I know it's the last question. I think the farm, off-farm, non-farm thing is really interesting. Is to say, if you're working in rural areas, you should be looking at all of them, and just realistically, unless you're next to a particular economic hub or whatever it is.
Mm.
But a lot of it, otherwise, most of the jobs would be, whatever you might call them, would be in the farm sector.
Yeah.
And you just need to recognize that. But there are still clever things you can do in the other areas. I said I think rallies had to close early as there was issues with the donor, but I think they had a couple of sectors that were, maybe six sectors. Some of them were smallholder farmers, but they also had micro enterprises in rural areas. I think finance in rural areas, access
Mm.
to finance, this migration, solar. So they had this quite balanced portfolio, and some micro enterprise side, some was more wage employment. And I think that's quite important. I'd also say I think there's a lot of knowledge gaps here, in at least in the rural jobs area. For instance, I'm not aware of any programs taking an MSD approach to agricultural wage labor in
Mm.
sub-Saharan Africa. I think that would be really interesting, and definitely really, supporting particularly vulnerable people. I think there's a lot more to know about these different types of interventions. But still, we just need to be, modest in our claims about what we can do. People are often migrating to urban areas
Yes.
because there's more jobs there.
Yes.
Um, Yeah, and I think you're right as well. You know, a lot of our work is kind of piloting. It's kind of trying to find new ideas, trying to answer a lot of these questions about what's possible.
Mhm. Thank you very much, Ashley. I wish we have a lot longer. I mean, this is sort of like a 2 hour discussion, especially when because of the nuances inside of employment. Aside from the rural and urban dichotomy, you then have the non farm, off farm, and on farm, and the migration issue that you talked about. I worked in a refugee setting, and most of the refugees are actually they become farm laborers, and it would be really interesting to apply an MSD to see
Mm.
in sort of like farm employment, especially driven by this sort of forced migration. There's a climate impact on employment that I really would love to explore with you. So I'm saying all of that in the hope that you will come back again and we'll discuss this aspect of this. What I should have done is really narrow this discussion down to just one simple thing. But I promise if you do decide to come back the next time, we will take these things one topic at a time. But thank you very much for sparing the time to talk to me on this really important matter.
Yeah, we could have been speaking all day. I would have enjoyed that. So next time.
Yes, no, thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, this is the author of the paper that I talked about in my previous broadcast. This is such an important paper, especially if you are an MSD person. Even if you're a seasoned MSD professional, it's really good to go into the paper so you can begin to frame some of the things that you're forced to do, either by the conditions of the context or the controls that your implementing organization imposes on you. I think this is an important paper that we all should really study and hopefully extend for the work that we're doing in MSD. Thank you very much, Ashley, for spending the time with us, and thank you all for spending the time to watch this. And hopefully we'll see you soon. Bye bye.